Hello again. I've been doing a few more games, and in this one we were going to talk about a few examples from the Sicilian and how to play against it. So usually I open with 1d4, but recently I've been switching over to 1e4, and I think I kind of like the positions I get out of it. I think white is better in pretty much every line. Just one line I struggle with is just the winnow French, but other than that, I'm pretty much fine. It's just that the winnow French is kind of sharp, and I'm not exactly sure how to do the critical test with the poison pawn yet. Just to put it on the board so you can know what I'm talking about, it's e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, and then bishop b4. It leads to a lot of very sharp and complicated lines. E takes d5 maybe avoids some complications, but the critical test is c5, a3, trade, and if something like knight e7 or queen a5, this queen g4 move. So this is the critical test that I haven't studied, and it's just the maybe one line with white that I'm not so sure about with 1e4, but with a little bit of practice I should have that down as well. Knight a3 is the alternative, it's the positional variation. But aside from the winnow French, I'm pretty confident in every opening after 1e4. White just has a good position all around. With 1d4, which is what I have been playing before, there's the Benko gambit that still annoys me. That is knight f6, c4, c5, d5, and b5. So sometimes this gambit is kind of complicated, and that one annoys me. Another one might be the Grunfeld defense. This is pretty sharp and complicated after d5. And then these lead to a lot of sharp theoretical lines if you go into something like this. White, it looks like white should be slightly better because you have the center, but it's all very sharp and complicated. So a couple of lines like those that I'm not really sure about with the 1d4 line. But 1e4 I've been pretty confident in every variation except for winnow French. So I have been switching over to this recently, and in a few of my games my opponents played the Sicilian defense. I play the Sicilian defense myself with black, and let's see. I'm confident in most variations except for maybe 6 bishop e3 or 6 bishop e2. Those two lines are have been kind of annoying me lately. So knight f3 in this particular game, I think that's just the most principled move. Yeah, it says I pretty much always play knight f3, just preparing d4. So e6 in this game, d4, takes, knight f6. It says a6 is a pretty good move here. In this game it was knight f6. Masters. Okay, and here the theory continues. Knight c3, d6, or knight c6. So a lot of possible moves here for black. Knight c6, knight db5, or knight takes c6. Yeah, it says the main line is this, but I just played knight takes c6 in the game because I liked how I could get a good grip on black's pawn structure right here. So to show you the example, it would be knight takes c6, b takes, and then e5. So I'm setting up en passant, and I'm preparing to give black a split pawn structure after something like d5. So the better pawn structure gives white an advantage. That's why I played for this line. So I'll look for some alternatives along the way with that. So knight d5, knight e4. It looks like a pretty logical move because black is just trying to shatter your pawns. Like if you don't play knight e4, then he's probably going to take, shatter the pawns, or worse, add like something like bishop b4 and create this pin. So removing the knight from that position makes a lot of sense. Queen c7 attacks the e5 pawn, so I answer f4. Queen b6. And here I played queen f3, and it says that's a step in the wrong direction. I was trying to just find some kind of sensible way to develop my pieces. I wanted to play the move c4 here, But after bishop b4 check, white has nothing better than king e2. And in fact, this is mainline theory. I didn't know it. So there's a lot of interesting lines here. And it just turns out that black can never really exploit this exposed king. One example line might be something like f5, knight f2, bishop a6, and then king f3. In the future, white just plays bishop e3, and the white king is totally safe. He's not really going to get under attack at any point. And then this is where white's pawn structure just defends the king even when it's all the way up on f3. This is not, let's see, not how I would normally want to play, but in fact it concretely works. So let's see. So the principles of king safety and all of my assumptions about king safety, this kind of position just demonstrates that chess is very complicated, and sometimes these principles I use for king safety, they're just not correct. So I don't want to play moves like king e2 and king f3 early on in the game. I want to castle, but the computer and the opening theory says it's all totally fine. So I did look at a lot of those complications, and in the future I do want to look more into this c4 move. In this game it was queen f3, a5, a3. This is preparing c4, which I eventually do. f5, knight g5. Knight f2 was an alternative there. Or e takes. Okay, this was another Grandmaster game. It was knight takes f6. You trade, have queen h5 check, and you ruin black's castle right there. And here the computer says, if we go over to this, yeah. The computer says queen takes b2 is a draw after queen a5, and then queen back, and that's a perpetual check. So, interesting possible line there. That's just one theoretical draw. So this game continued with knight g5, queen c3. The idea is to just prepare b4 and then just open up this side. Also have a bishop e3 in mind, so a couple of ideas here. h6, bishop e3, making a counter blow. He attacks my knight, so I counterattack his queen. Now knight f3. And white just has a very solid position. These pawns are all restricting the black pieces. My pieces can easily develop, and then I'm just going to castle. So then white just has a much better position. d5, he takes. So here's the split pawn structure I was talking about after you take en passant. And here I just win a pawn, and the rest is kind of downhill. And then the game continues for some time, but eventually black is going to drop the piece. Black is just dropping material because my pieces are way too active. And then it's over. So that's one example of how you can fight the Sicilian with e6 on the second move. Let's go back to that for a second. So in this example, e5 trying to set up this these split pawns. It says knight db5 is another option as well, aside from knight takes c6. And then I think it said a6 was a really good move here as well. Like a6, d6. I think a6, that says it's the... I think it said it was the con, no. Nope, that wasn't right. It was before knight f6, and that was a6. Yep, there it is. Knight just a6 here. Knight f6 is the third most popular move. So a6 is another line I might have to look into there. But if you go into something like this, these are just a couple of ways you can try to fight against it. So in the next game it was e4, c5. And here we have the Najdorf variation. If we go over to the player game, it says I play bishop e3 or bishop g5. Both of these moves, I think they're pretty good. I get good positions with both sides. I think bishop e3 is a little bit better because if you go into a bishop g5 line, then oftentimes what's going to happen is that this bishop is going to be in an awkward spot. It's going to get in the way of white's advancing pawns with f4 and g4. So a bishop on e3 would be more harmonious. So to give you an example line, it's f4. Queen b6 is also possible. But if bishop e7, queen f3, queen c7, castles, this is all theory, and then g4. So black is fine. Like, both sides are fine. Maybe white is a little bit better because his attack on the king side is faster. But this is just one example of the bishop getting in the way. And then if the bishop were on e3, maybe this would be even more advantageous because you can just push g5 right away and the bishop just isn't in the way. Also, this bishop on g5, sometimes it gets hit by tactics like h6 and g5, and black can turn it into a pawn gambit. So bishop g5, it's fine. It's a pretty fun line. I play it with both sides. But I think bishop e3 is a little bit more accurate, and it can be a very tough move to meet sometimes. So in the game e5, knight b3, bishop e6. Okay, and then this h5 line, I think this one's pretty interesting. I tried playing h5 and I wasn't having good results with it with black. And then I was going for a line with like bishop e7, queen d2, h5 now. The idea is that if white plays bishop d3 now, then bishop takes d3 and then queen has to go to d2, then to d3. So white loses tempo if you do this waiting move with bishop e7. So that's what I have been playing when I tried out h5, but I didn't have good results. And if you play h5 here, it says like there's a ton of draws in this kind of position. So I tried looking into this line with h5 one move sooner to see if this is better. So I played knight d5, and my idea was that if takes, bishop f5, bishop d3, and now you see the difference, it's queen from d1 takes on d3. So that was my idea. And then this would be more advantageous for white because I've won a tempo. So bishop d5, e takes, knight b7, and then it says the most popular grandmaster move is queen d2. I looked at some possible lines here. So I do want to mention one thing. It's that the Sicilian defense, it's very overwhelming because there's a lot of complications and a lot of theory, and this is why some players just avoid it entirely. In fact, if we go back to the beginning for a second, a lot of players play bishop b5 check here trying to avoid some complications. But when I approach opening theory, I think about it as a gradual learning process and a gradual building process. So you're not going to be able to memorize everything because nobody can do that. It's just way too overwhelming. So over the course of several months, I like to just build up multiple studies and then just look for typical ideas in different lines and try to learn from what the computer is doing, try to find some novel lines, maybe create some high quality games by putting stockfish against stockfish, and then analyzing those, trying to make sense of it. So I don't really try to memorize everything. I just try to find typical ideas and typical plans. And then depending on the situation, you just apply it accordingly. If it works in a certain situation, then it works. If it doesn't work, then that's when you start learning from experience. And then you create massive experience in different openings, and that's how you ultimately get good at them. It's not through memorizing them. It's through massive experience. So don't rush with studying openings. Maybe think of it as just a slow learning process. Maybe it's going to take like 6 months to 8 months, 12 months. And then over that course, you're going to experiment with a lot of different things. You're going to compare a lot of computer lines. And as you do that, you're going to build up your experience as you develop your openings. And okay, you can expand it to even d4 and e4 with white. So I've expanded my openings a little bit far. So c4. So queen d2 was the main line there, and it leads to a lot of interesting stuff. Rook c8, rook c1, b6, and the computer says c5 is a mistake here. Here I was trying to play kind of aggressive. I was trying to just break up these pawns and then just play bishop takes a6 immediately, hit this rook. So I was playing very aggressively with c5. The computer says just bishop d3 and then castles. It makes sense because it prevents black from playing e4, and then eventually I can prepare like knight d2 to e4. And then I think the computer said like b takes c5 was a mistake, or rook b8 was a mistake. So a couple of misplays there, but eventually knight b6 was the ultimate blunder, and then bishop e5 check is just over. Black is going to lose a tempo by going back like this, and I'm going to play a4. White just has this outside pass pawn, and now he's also paralyzed by this pin. I still have this possible maneuver like this. And white just has a better position. I can even crack open the center with f4 and then get to the king this way. So a lot of different plans for white. So this would be a strategically winning position, and this is why he just resigned after bishop e5 check. I was kind of shocked that it ended so abruptly after just 16 moves. But I think we have one more example from the Sicilian. So in this one we looked a little bit at the English attack with h5. So this is a very popular line recently. Another possible line might be something like this with e6. And then this is one line aside from knight db5. And then this last line is the Nimzovich variation, and I've never really been too fond of this variation. I think I tried it in a couple of my games a while back, but I wasn't really too satisfied. So knight f3, knight c6. Sorry, knight f6. And here this black knight is just going to start getting kicked around, like e5, knight d5, knight c3. I just attack the knight. And then the main line is e6 or knight takes c3. And if knight takes c3, I'm just going to prepare d4 in a couple moves. Oh, no, I'm not. Okay, so it says I assumed wrong. I assumed b takes c3 and then d4. The computer just says, like the master database just says d5. Okay, so I assumed that wrong. I didn't know that was the correct move there. So d takes c4, d takes c3 gives you faster development with bishop f4. Well, I just learned something from that. In the game, my opponent played e6, which is the main line. So I assumed wrong about knight takes c3, so I learned something there, though. But after e6, knight takes d5, e takes d5, d4. And here black has these doubled pawns. In a lot of lines, white can try to win this pawn with queen takes d5 after d takes c5. So knight c6. The Grandmaster move, it's d takes c5 immediately, and then just taking the pawn. And then black goes into this gambit. And here white just is up material and has a huge win rate there. So that's the main line. In the game I played c3, which is also sensible. It has a huge win rate for white as well. Just reinforcing the pawn, it's very simple. And then after d6, just bishop e5. And just look at the win rate. It's 65% it says for white. And then also white has a decent advantage according to the computer, plus 0.7. And then here bishop d7, and this is just a losing move, so I'm going to close that. So in a Grandmaster game, he played e takes d6, and the computer says that's also wrong. In the game I played Castle, the computer says that's wrong. It says the correct move is actually d takes c5, and this is a novelty that nobody plays. And the reasoning is after takes, queen takes, you take that pawn. Then knight f3, bishop d6, now you take that pawn. So that's the cleanest way for white to win the pawn. In the game I just castled. C takes. The computer says it wants me to play rook e1 immediately. Just looking for tactics on this file after something like, whoops. looking tactics on the e-file after something like this move, and then that's going to be a check. And then this is an example of a pin with knight f5 hitting the queen. In the game I did e takes d6 immediately, bishop takes, rook e1, knight e7, and I win a pawn. No, I don't win a pawn, I just create an isolated pawn. That was the point behind this whole maneuver I just did. I simplified the center a little bit. I got rid of black's doubled pawns, but I also have this isolated pawn here, a strong blockader. I'm also about to trade a couple of pieces, and then white is probably going to win this pawn in the endgame. And it says I made a step in the wrong direction with something like queen h5. I was looking to start piling up on the enemy king with things like maybe knight f5, bishop d3, try to attack h7. So maybe this was the wrong plan. Queen c7, bishop d3. It still says I'm better though. g3, that's blunting this diagonal. He was threatening this check at some point. I'm also blocking out this knight, so no more knight f4. And then knight f5, it says this is still the wrong plan. Trade bishop e3, now knight f5. And if you look at all three of these pieces, they aren't really coordinated very well in attacking the black king. This knight is kind of blocking everything up. So it's not really clear what this knight on f5 is doing immediately. And then after, it says h6 here, and then there's some complications with this sacrifice. But in the game, he didn't respond to these aggressive pieces the correct way anyway, and this is one way you get rewarded for playing incorrect attacks. It's that your opponent often has a hard time defending against them, even if they aren't objectively correct. So he made this mistake anyway, and now white just has two powerful bishops looking in this direction at his queen. So I was rewarded for my incorrect attack because my opponent didn't defend properly, and then this is where I started falling apart, and you see I'm up a pawn. In the future, I pick off another pawn. I get very aggressive pieces. The game goes on for some time. It said I was low on time, actually, like 39 seconds. And then I was getting plus 15 for every move. So definitely a cleaner way to convert this. Yeah, and I was shocked that rook b3 was a blunder. I'm just trying to get behind the passed pawn and then push this to queening. The computer says it's not necessary and I can just push b5 immediately. He can't stop it. I'm just going to push it immediately. If he gets behind it, then my king supports these squares anyway. But rook b3, it's an apparent draw. And then there's a lot of sloppy technique on both sides in this endgame. But practically, like, it should be a draw in a lot of cases, but practically it's just very difficult to defend against this outside pass pawn. Because he has, like, this pawn, his pawn is a little bit slower. Yeah, and then again it says king b6. So king b6 instead of king b8. The idea is that this king is closer to the middle of the board and it's just going to run in this direction in case this pawn falls. This way the king is going to be a little bit closer to this outside pass pawn, so after this is traded for this, or after all of this is traded, after this is traded for this, now the rook and the king are going to work together to stop his extra pass pawn over here. And then if my king is too far away, then that's what allows black to draw with this outside pass pawn. So we'll see if we find something like that. So I just pushed. Okay, and apparently king c8 is the difference between a win and a loss here. I mean, not a win and a loss, but a win and a draw. And that was the move, yeah. So king c8, rook f4, rook g3 check. this is the move the computer wanted me to find. It's that after this takes, I queen and this rook is now pinned, therefore I can get this queen out, I'll snatch this pawn off at some point, and then white will win the endgame that way. So, rook g3 check, I did not see that, but that's why king c7 is wrong. It now gets in the way of this diagonal. Okay, I did not notice that. And then the final mistake was this check. King b6, and I have the building a bridge, this is like the Lucina position. So he can no longer stop this pawn. And now here I just simplify it to a one rook endgame. This is going to be a basic checkmate. So I hope you learned a little bit about fighting the Sicilian defense. I'll keep practicing with 1e4. I think I have a lot of good results in these games, and I'll keep practicing with this. Maybe there's, I think in that other game, like, let me go back to that other game for a second. It was, oh no, it was actually this game. Yeah. Well, I assumed wrong about that move, so I learned something there. So I'll definitely keep looking into this, trying to get better with 1e4. I think my results with 1e4, if you look at my player database, it says that my results with 1e4 are slightly better than 1d4. So I'm definitely going to keep practicing with this. I think 1e4 is a promising opening for me. I think I like it even more than 1d4. So I'll keep practicing. I'll keep it up on the top 100 challenge, and I hope you learned something about fighting the Sicilian and a few of the games I've been playing lately. So have a good day.